This guy wants to fight every weekend.
6 to 8 wolves with a dominant leader, alpha male, at the top. He leads the hunt and usually eats first.
They call this guy Khabib 2.0.
Your winner by TKO and still undefeated, Khamzat Chimaev.
One of the big stars of Fight Island this past weekend is Khamzat Chimaev. Do you worry that it's going to be difficult to get him fights with ranked opponents?
Where is the ceiling for you? Where is your limit?
I can fight after 1 hour, maybe. If you give me one fight, if somebody injured, just tell me. I'm here in Abu Dhabi. I'm gonna smash everybody.
do you look at the welterweight division and see anybody that can challenge you right now? I mean, we need to find someone that can slow you down.
Doesn't matter, everybody. I'm gonna smash everybody.
Just
Smash everybody.
Thank you for joining me once again and welcome back to Keenan KTV. It is almost time to see one of the most exciting fighters in action again. Having arguably the most explosive rise the sport has ever seen, Khamzat Chimaev is looking to cement his name as the next big thing. So in today's video, let us take a closer look at why Khamzat Chimaev can defeat Gilbert Durinho Burns. But before we begin, be sure to leave a like on this video and subscribe with the bell notification turned on. And with that being said, let us jump right into the video. Starting with size, it's often the most overlooked fact that we have in the sport. Size is the ultimate deciding factor of how dominant a fighter will naturally be, most of the time. This is the game of inches, and the fact that we have weight cutting just shows how much these fighters are willing to sacrifice to attain the smallest of advantages. When we look at the welterweight division, most of the current higher ranked fighters really could be competing in the lightweight division, or most already have. For example, Gilbert Burns, Jorge Masvidal, Michael Chiesa, Nate Diaz, Rafael dos Anjos, Kevin Lee, just to name a few relevant names. One could even make the argument that Colby Covington could also be fighting at the 155-pound division.
I guess you're doing a weight cut now?
Yeah, I don't really cut much weight, man. I fight in my natural weight. Most of the guys, that are cutting lots of weight, they think they get an advantage. I don't need an advantage, man. I just fight in my natural weight. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. It's not healthy. It's not healthy. These guys are draining a lot of water from their brain, and that's why a lot of them are getting knocked out a lot easier. I've never understood it. I fight in my natural weight. I'm not afraid to fight bigger guys. I know what's gonna happen to them.
How's the weight?
Good. After sparring yesterday with Dustin, it was at 181.
Another fighter that you have beef with is Dustin Poirier. Obviously, he's fighting for the lightweight championship. You want to fight this guy. Can you ever see yourself going down to 155, or do you see yourself fighting him at 170 and he would come up?
Yeah, I remember, that Louisiana swamp trash Dustin Poirier. We used to step on the scale at our old gym all the time, and he weighed bigger than me. I was like 182. He'd be like 185, 188. So he's a bigger guy than me. I'm not scared to fight, guys at my weight. He's obviously scared to fight guys his weight. He has to cut all this weight to feel like he has an advantage over guys.
Though it is a hard weight cut, which technically everybody has a tough weight cut for fighters who don't fight at the walk-around weight, it shouldn't really take away from the fact that the current welterweight champion Kamaru Usman probably cuts down from close to 200 pounds. Why all of this is relevant will be apparent shortly, but let's take Khabib Nurmagomedov for example. He was one of those fighters who had the roughest of weight cuts for the 155-pound division, even failing to compete against Tony Ferguson at UFC 209 because of a very botched weight cut. This just comes to show how hard of a time he had cutting down to that weight division. However, ultimately, after such sacrifices, he was able to compete with a relatively decent and notable size advantage. He was arguably, most of the time, always the heavier fighter in that octagon, and he's now looked at as the best lightweight of all time, the strongest and the most dominant fighter the division has ever seen. Something that wouldn't have been the case if he did what Colby Covington is currently doing and what Gilbert Burns is currently doing. I'm not advocating for weight cutting, but the advantages are apparent. To now compare Khamzat Chimaev and Gilbert Burns, we have Khamzat Chimaev, who stands in at 6 foot 2 inches tall with a 75-inch reach, against Gilbert Durinho Burns, who is 5 foot 10 inches inches tall with a 71-inch reach. He's got a 4-inch reach advantage and a 4-inch height advantage. This is a massive difference.
I'm small, brother. How to eat much, brother? Eat banana, brother. Chocolate, brother. You sure? That's really power. Show him power, brother.
I'll show you Saturday. I'll show you.
People seem to forget that Khamzat Chimaev is also a UFC middleweight fighter. Gilbert Burns is currently only a welterweight fighter who has competed at the lightweight division. So there will be a massive difference in size and physicality, and this is something that is very notable. Let us now move over to our next part of this video, power. An area in which Gilbert will not be matching Khamzat in, no matter how hard he tried, will be natural power. Khamzat Chimaev is a middleweight who cuts down to welterweight. He has knocked out middleweights out cold before. Gilbert does not seem to possess this ability, so it'll be a slippery slope for Gilbert right away when Khamzat is coming forward and unloading his shots. His shots don't need to be picture perfect or technically sound to be effective. Khamzat's power will also come into play in the form of his grappling power or physicality. He's going to be able to outmuscle Gilbert Burns in the grappling exchanges on the feet, in my opinion. Gilbert has great power too. In my opinion, it is very much so underrated, but I fail to see a middleweight like Khamzat Chimaev getting hurt by him. Khamzat won't be respecting the power of Burns all too much, in my opinion, which will help him come forward and pressure Gilbert Burns. With this said, let us now take a closer look at offense. It is clear that Gilbert Burns has always been relatively offensive-minded. He spends the majority of his cage time in the center of the octagon. Unfortunately, his preferred fighting style will be altered by the ultra-aggressive Khamzat Chimaev, and it is pretty much a certainty that Khamzat Chimaev will be the ring general, forcing Gilbert Burns to fight from the back foot. Usually, this only goes one way. The taller, more aggressive fighter can box the smaller fighter in and start picking his shots. We have seen this plenty of times in tall versus small matchups. Conor McGregor at featherweight had a slight but notable height advantage alongside a decent reach advantage, so he always made sure that his smaller opponents would be backed up, pinned up against the fence, and ultimately, piece by piece, they would crumble to his ferocity. If they wanted to fight back and charge at him, Conor McGregor had all the room behind him to pop back out, avoid the offense, and return back to business. This is simply the natural dynamic that will take place once the opening bell sounds. What will transcribe from there is something only time will tell, but before time does, we will have to break the striking and wrestling game down. Let us start with the striking. When it comes to striking, it's easy to see why people think this will be the least fought in area of the fight. To me, however, elite level MMA is not as ground fighting oriented as we like to believe. Initially, sure, at the lower ranks, it plays a bigger role, but now as you climb higher and higher in the rankings, most fighters pretty much know how to cancel one another out in the grappling department. So, most grapplers do not even engage in grappling, Kamaru Usman versus Colby Covington being a prime example. Now, I would like to make a very selective distinction in this observation. This rule or commonality generally does not apply to Dagestan/Chechen fighters. Their fighting styles seem to stay true for the duration of their fighting careers. Even though they can add great skills around their grappling like striking and kicking, it seems to be only there to fall back on it and only to enhance their preferred fighting style. Usually, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighters along with North American style wrestlers tend to deviate from the grappling greatly after a certain point in their careers, which is understandable, smart, and obviously the right thing to do. But where they deviate, these type of fighters stay true and they even get better and better over time. So there is one specified area in which the Chechen/Dagestan fighters become specialists in, and that is where the common MMA fighter is lacking in today. MMA fighters today are very good in general, but they are not a specific specialist in one area. Obviously, this is not something bad, but with a fighting style so dominant like the Sambo grappling style, it can become a problem later on. But with Gilbert Burns, this is something that happened too. Yes, he has developed great hand speed and underrated knockout power, where he was able to hurt the current champion Kamaru Usman and the former champion Tyron Woodley. But I have to say this, Gilbert Burns is fundamentally sounder than Khamzat Chimaev by miles. His timing and countering are what can make him very dangerous paired with his underrated power. The right shot at the right moment can be devastating. If Khamzat Chimaev walks in recklessly and gets countered, the result of you walking into a big blow is just devastating. So he will have to put some respect on the power of Gilbert Burns. But Khamzat Chimaev is not a dumb fighter, and he will not be reckless in my opinion. The boxing style of Gilbert Burns is something that I would label more so looping than straight. He waits for the right opening to come in so he can counter. He doesn't create openings by coming forward and picking the opponent apart. This is the most crucial part of it all. Being a smaller fighter, you would have to come forward, but if you're being backed up, then this all comes down crumbling. But the main difference is this: even though Gilbert Burns likes to come forward, similarly to Conor McGregor, on the front foot he's still defensively minded and looks for counters. So when he is being backed up, this doesn't really take away from his overall fighting style anyway. If anything, this can be a positive. He doesn't have to go after the opponent because the opponent is coming in on him, and if he can find the right opening and counter, he could potentially land a good flashy shot on Khamzat Chimaev. How many of these he can land, we will have to wait and see, but if he can land it consistently, then he will be winning the rounds. Now looking at Khamzat Chimaev's fighting style and punching style, he seems to be a little bit more straight punching oriented, as it would make sense looking at his size advantages over most of his opponents. He keeps the range going with his jabs and straights. And here we have two things: Khamzat Chimaev coming forward, predominantly using 1-2s. Gilbert Burns is a looping shot fighter, predominantly waits for right openings to come in so he can come over the shoulder and connect with big looping round shots. So Gilbert Burns right away, even though he will be pressured in my opinion, will not be completely blown out of the water. He will have his openings, he will find shots that he can land, so in general he will know what to do. If he can use good footwork, he can possibly be connecting with relative frequency if the fight remains on the feet, which I doubt. That being said, however, the size discrepancy still remains. I am not entirely convinced that Gilbert Burns will be putting up a masterful striking clinic on Khamzat Chimaev. Even though he has technically better striking, Khamzat Chimaev does not need a ridiculous amount of striking tools and skills to beat Gilbert Burns' striking. The basics will just get the job done in my opinion, especially for a fighter with a 4-inch height and reach advantage. Pairing that with the consistent takedown threat, it will not be a striking contest by any means. And so before we know it, Khamzat Chimaev will probably put Gilbert Burns up against the fence and start to work from there, which will lead us to our next part: grappling. When it comes to Gilbert Burns, sure, there is no denying his accolades, but in the last 6 years, he has only had 2 submission victories, and those were against pretty much no names. So my point is this: he's got great Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but as it usually has been, he has never been the best takedown artist and fighter to completely shut down his opponents on the mat like the now infamous Dagestan Chechen style. So if he's not really all too familiar with submitting opponents on a frequent basis, he will really have to present something truly special that Khamzat has never seen before, which I doubt he will. I've already talked about how Burns is now more so striking oriented, especially against fellow grapplers, but now I want to shed some light on how uncommon it is for Dagestan region fighters who have trained in this Sambo style. For Khamzat, he will remain the fighter who will come forward and try to take down his opponents and control them no matter how old he is and how late he is in his career. He will simply be this type of fighter, especially against welterweights whom he is bigger over, but especially, moreover, a former lightweight fighter. I am sure that Khamzat Chimaev will struggle to take down Burns initially, but given his strength, skill, and size, I believe that he will end up taking Burns down against the fence and keep him there. I am also more of the opinion that this time around, he will be controlling his opponent more than completely smashing them right away. Burns, in my opinion, will be very defensively sound, so he will probably not get beaten down by any real ground and pound. So this fight will display a lot of controlled time for Khamzat Chimaev, and this fight might turn out to be Edson Barboza versus Khabib Nurmagomedov-esque. And if you flip things around and look at potentially Gilbert Burns taking Khamzat Chimaev down, if something of that nature would happen, I would truly be surprised. So, in my opinion, this fight will be coming down to Khamzat Chimaev being on top or controlling Burns up against the fence. Let us now move over to our final part of this video: youth. Though it might be an odd aspect or factor to name, this ultimately is still a young man's sport. By the age of 35, a fighter has pretty much shown their worth in this time frame, given that they have started relatively early on. So by this age, if you are the best, you would be, or you would have been that. For Gilbert Burns, on the other hand, he has fallen short against a champion in a quite noble performance, but not noble enough. He's been circulating the top 10 for years, but ultimately he has just not been the type of fighter you could truly label as elite. Is Khamzat Chimaev elite? We'll see when these two fighters are locked in the cage. But one thing's for sure, after so many fights, Gilbert Burns, in my opinion, has never really been the fighter to have this big killer instinct to begin with, but more so right now, I think it is relatively more so diminished after a heartbreaking defeat at the hands of Kamaru Usman. Gilbert Burns does not have to be a very mean man. He doesn't need to out-crazy Khamzat Chimaev. You know, this is not a necessity for him to win, but it just sheds some light on the differences in mentality. Khamzat Chimaev is coming to completely smash and dominate, and Gilbert Burns seems to just look for an upset. The mind frames of these two fighters are so contrasting that it is pretty interesting when you look at both of them. Gilbert, come fight night, will show great resistance, arguably the most resistance that a Khamzat Chimaev fight will show. He's got so much experience that will come into play, and he's definitely not a big underdog in this matchup. He's not going to be dwarfed, in my opinion. You know, he will not be stomped down, and if he is, then Khamzat Chimaev is truly a very, very elite fighter. So just how much resistance and triumph will he be able to show against Khamzat Chimaev? Well, in the end, only time will tell what will truly happen. For now, this was why Khamzat Chimaev will be able to defeat Gilbert Burns. Who do you think will win come fight night? Leave it in the comment section down below, and as always, I have been Keenan from Keenan KTV, signing off. Later.